Sushmit Ghosh is one of the co-directors of the documentary film Writing with Fire. I'm Matt Noble of Gold Derby. Good journalists ask the right questions. In making this documentary, what was sort of the question you wanted most answered?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think what drew us to this film was the fact that we wanted to bear witness to a moment in India's own history where Dalit women had picked up the phone camera and themselves were witnessing for the country. And I think that the fact that Dalit women had never been represented in positions of power, or very rarely so in our history, in our popular culture, felt like one of the right reasons to sort of like come into the story, apart from the many other compelling sort of reasons that we had. Fantastic characters, this larger conversation about journalism that was taking place across the world, free speech, themes of gender and caste, and so on and so forth. So I think a multitude of reasons, but I think one of the things that really propelled us was, here was a moment that for us felt historical as Indians, and we wanted to amplify it.
And I guess dealing with all those different issues, gender, caste, journalism, politics, all these things sort of converge with the story of this news outlet, the only news outlet in India that's run by women. And they've really, through moving to digital and all those sort of stuff, become so successful. What made them great journalists outside of sort of caste, gender, and their sort of political context? Because they really were able to do things that other organizations weren't doing or reporting on.
I think the fact that they essentially hark back to sort of the fundamental values of what the fourth estate is supposed to do, to hold those in positions of power accountable for the power that has been invested in them by the people. And essentially, I think that, Khabar Lahariya, and that's the name of the newspaper, is built around three values of being an independent, feminist, rural news institution. And we caught them at a time in 2006 where they had completed 14 years of print journalism. So there was already a very strong body of work. And these weren't community journalists, they were professional journalists. We caught them at a time where they decided to switch from print to digital journalism. And I think that I think that the good work that they had done on the ground essentially got amplified the moment they moved to digital, because more people started essentially reading the news, and they were able to diversify their audience. Because typically you would have men picking up a newspaper in those parts of India, but now you had more women, and the demographic spectrum increased. And as the demographic spectrum increased, there was greater viewership, there was greater fan following, and the women, the journalists themselves, used an interesting model of enforcing accountability and transparency by starting to sort of like creating, how do I put it? They would find ways in which to reach out to people in positions of power on the internet, pushing them to move on the stories that they were reporting on, and ensuring that the roads got built, the schools had electricity, there were midday meals for the kids, there was proper healthcare in the public healthcare centers, etc. So once they shifted to digital, their stories became much more visible, and that essentially led to a system of accountability being set into place. But I think, just very briefly, Matt, going back to your question, I think these are journalists who have essentially really shown the world what the true ethics and the fundamental ethics of journalism are, where you are holding those in power accountable and trying to create a level playing field if you're coming to journalism through the ethics of equity and justice.
Yeah, and what's such an interesting sort of story in this film is you have the women of Khabar Lahariya in so many ways in their context, people without power, but are affecting so much change and holding people that have been sort of born into a much higher position of power than them accountable. What was it like to sort of play with that contrast of the sort of the societal pressures going against them, while at the same time the power and the change they were able to affect?
I think something unique was happening as we started filming them, because you have 3,000 years of caste oppression, and while the practice of caste-based discrimination is banned in India, in some parts it's practiced with open vengeance. And Uttar Pradesh, where our story is set, is really in more ways than one a petri dish where all kinds of violence is perpetuated against the Dalit community. And I feel that on the one hand, you had a 3,000-year-old system of oppression, one of the oldest systems of oppression in the world that existed. And on the other hand, you had, the unfettered energy of the internet and new technologies. And you had the women at Khabar Lahariya right in the middle of these two opposing, clashing forces. So we anchored the story through the world of the journalists, and I feel that they've essentially rewritten a lot of the codes. The fact that you have Dalit women working as journalists in these parts of the country, which report some of the highest levels of systematic violence against women, against journalists, and against Dalits, all three independent loaded terms in themselves, in itself has essentially broken a lot of barriers. The fact that you have Dalit women going out, seen as journalists in a press or in an industry that is quote unquote dominated by upper caste men, in itself has broken new ground for them. And I think we were able to essentially witness that power and find ways in which to not only present the story for folks at home, but to the world, because it was a story that needed witnessing.
Mm. And sort of touching on that, one of, I think, the sort of best lines in the film was when it was said, "When Dalit women succeed, we can redefine what it means to be powerful." As approaching this film, what did you want to define as power and present as power?
I think what we wanted to do was present Meera and Sunita and Shamkali and all the other sisters in the cohort, so to speak, as quintessential modern Indian women. I think a lot has been done around storytelling culture in India, where you have, especially in documentaries, where you have a Western filmmaker, typically a man, coming in, and the way stories from India have been presented to the world have been very extractive. And we watched those films and gone, hey, there's more to it. That's not our story. I mean, there is a lot of grace and dignity and power invested over there. But why are you not showing us that? And I think that for us, it was so important to present and imbue this story with the inherent power that the women carried. And I think that we wanted to present their intelligence, their wit, also their lightness of being, because when you watch the film, you realize that they also know how to have fun. They're doing a difficult job, but they're banded together as a collective, and they are creating great change on the ground. And it's difficult on the day-to-day basis, but they're also funny women. They also have a sense of humor. And I think these were all the values that essentially we assembled together and then started stitching when we were editing the film, that, what would the story of India look like? And would the story give the world hope? Of course it would, because it gave us hope. And how can we present it to the world to inspire change when people watch Writing with Fire and see these women against all odds and against all obstacles delivering change on the ground.
A journalist's role is to report stories, and in some ways, people making a documentary film, your role is to tell a story. Was that sort of interesting, sort of thinking, how do we tell the story of them reporting news, which is sort of like got a very timeliness, but you get the luxury of being able to tell it over a longer period of time and charting how those stories play into a bigger picture of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a question that we were constantly sort of like, between Rintu and me bouncing off with each other, because, what was happening was when we started filming in 2016, the journalists discovered the power of being behind the camera themselves. It's very different from pen and paper, and the dynamics completely changes. And so it was weird, and it was a bit meta, because they were recording their truth and we were recording our own truth, and yet it was also subjective, because you could like pan the camera here and something else was playing out, and that's what storytelling is all about. But I think what essentially ended up happening was that they were in the pursuit of truth as journalists. And in that sense, they were trying to frame everything within the bounds of objectivity and facts and so on and so forth. And for us, truth, in a sense, was an abstraction, so to speak, because while what they were doing on the ground as journalists was important for us to document, what we were really, really interested in was, what are their inner worlds? What does their inner world look like? How are they going to navigate the multitude of challenges that they face within their homes as well as outside their homes? These complex relationships that they have with their children, with their husband, with their sisters, with their parents, and the choices that they have to make on a daily basis that will not only have an impact on them, but their families, their communities, and essentially on how they're viewed as journalists in Indian society. So it was a lot of that, and so the growth of the newspaper, the success of the newspaper was really a Trojan horse, which we used to dive into the worlds of Meera and the other two characters, Sunita and Shamkali.
Yeah. Did it take a while for them to get used to you filming them, filming someone for an interview? Because
yeah, I mean, so their news cycle was they would go into the ground, report on a story, come back, share the footage to the edit studio in Delhi, and within 48 hours, the story would be online. And that was like the story producing experience for them. So I think after the first week, and this was our recce trip, Meera turns around and she goes, as we were packing up our bags to come back to Delhi, she was like, you're done with your feature documentary, right? You're done with filming the stories. And we were like, we haven't even begun, Meera. This is just like a recce trip. And I think 6 months down the line, when we'd done 2 more schedules with them, she was like, you must have got your story now, right? And we were like, no, we're just beginning. And I think eventually, like, they just got bored of us and our presence, because we had no answers to when are we going to end this story. We were just like, it's life, it's just going to happen. We don't have like a concrete sort of plan of action in terms of how this narrative is going to sketch out, because that's how it is. That's what nonfiction is all about. And I think what essentially happened was that as we started spending more time on the ground with them, they trusted us as filmmakers, but that trust essentially evolved into friendship, because we started spending time with their families and their loved ones. And, there was a lot of chitter chatter and banter, and that allowed for us to film intimately from within their worlds, looking outside. And we thought it would take 2 years. It took 5. But we were very happy with what we were able to achieve with the story.
When have the women been able to see the film?
Yes. So before the premiere at Sundance, we drove down to the village that they're in, and we set up like a projector in a small hut on a cloth and showed them the film. We were exceptionally nervous because they hadn't seen any of the footage over the course of 5 years. And this was the first time that they were going to watch the film. And, I mean, personally speaking, I don't necessarily always agree with my 5-year-old, the version of me from 5 years ago, And so I was just like, how are they going to respond to this? But, after the screening, as the credits rolled, there was clapping and there was hugging and there was some tears from them. And I think what really sort of like gave us, I would say we had the blessings to take this film out to the world when they said that we thought that one of our own has told this story. And, you know, I think that was a huge weight to carry, because both Rintu and I come from positions of privilege. We're not Dalit. We are outsiders to their story. And I think that that is something that we were very conscious about. That how do we tell a story that is inclusive, that is powerful, that does not exotify or other them, but is our story collectively as a people. And when they responded the way they did after that screening, you know, we were very, very happy.
Yes, and as you say, you directed this with Rhea Thomas, and you guys have worked on a few shorts before, but this is your first feature film together, and you've won some awards, 2 awards at Sundance, and you've made the Oscar shortlist for documentary feature, because documentary features one of the categories at the Oscars where there's a shortlist and then the nominees and then the winner. So what's it been like working with her? Why do you two work so well together on films?
Well, I mean, we met in film school way back in 2006. And then we started our film production company, Black Ticket Films, in 2009. And one of the key reasons why we started it was essentially because, especially in India at that point in time, almost a decade ago, the conversation around documentaries was still in a way, documentaries were seen as very didactic and academic. You know, if you ask someone to go to a theater and watch a documentary or, you know, a mainstream film, 99 times out of 100 people would want to go and watch like a Hollywood or a Bollywood film. And I think that that's something that we wanted to change, the language around nonfiction, that nonfiction can be engaging and entertaining and be designed around impact. And so over the course of the last 12 years, that's been a lot of our body of work. We do commission work, but our independent films, which have been shot nonfiction, have ranged on themes from refugee rights to climate change, to gender, and now journalism and media and caste. And I think that what we've been able to see is that both of us, when we work together, we bring 2 very different approaches to storytelling. Rintu is more micro. She likes getting into the details. She's very granular. I like seeing like the big picture, whether that be in terms of story or life. And, you know, in 2015, actually, we got married. And, you know, so we've been partners in more ways than one. So I think we complete each other in beautiful ways, and I think it's been a crazy ride making films together as really good friends and now together as partners. It's not easy at times, especially when you're working together in a pandemic, stuck in a room. But I think that we are committed to the power of nonfiction and what it can do, and in that sense, that's where, you know, our worlds are very similar.
As you've sort of spoken about, since you started working on this film, a lot changed for Kabalaharia's the publication, but also a lot's changed in the world, and a lot's changed about journalism, and this sort of comes out in a very timely place, even for in the States and other countries in the West, where journalism and the whole idea of truth that you were talking about seems to be getting lost, and people are sort of just retreating. How do you think this film speaks to today's climate, even outside of India, and how journalism is viewed and the power of journalism?
I think the fact that, you know, the film, when it premiered at Sundance and then it went on to win 2 awards, and one of them was an audience award, spoke to us about the fact that the film resonated with its first audience. But then over the course of the last 12 months, we've been in over 100 film festivals, and the number of audience awards that this film has picked up across Asia and Europe and America and Africa speaks to the fact that across geographies and cultures, this story has a strong hold. And I think principally because this is what people want to see from their journalists, right? And this is what we're not seeing. And the fact that here is a story that actually in concrete terms tells you how the work gets done. And the fact that it comes from protagonists you would least expect to create change speaks to the power of all of us. And the fact that we are all in our own positions of privilege and all in our own bubbles. So if the women at Khabar Lahariya can create change against the biggest of odds, what's stopping us? And I also think that this larger conversation around, Writing with Fire is a great example of what happens when the newsroom gets diversified, when it's not, just men in positions of power, either upper caste in the context of India or white, cis, hetero, middle-aged in the context of the West, holding the reins of power and deciding what gets passed off as news. But when the newsroom gets diversified, the meaning of news changes. And I think Khabar Lahariya is a great example because the national issues are as important as the local issues. There is no difference for them. And I think that's what journalism is about, where every last life matters, irrespective of where that life is. And I think if you are reporting with that kind of an ethos and then that kind of a value system and integrity built into your DNA as a journalist, you will create change. And I think that's one of the key reasons why people have so strongly resonated with the messages in Writing with Fire. We knew this was a quintessentially Indian story, but we also knew it would have like larger global ramifications in terms of, but we had no clue that it would find so much love through the year. So we feel very blessed.
Yeah. Well, at a time when I think a lot of journalists around the world feel or are being under attack in a lot of ways, it's great to have an uplifting story that shows how journalism can be used to hold the powerful to account. So thanks so much for talking with us today. People can go to goldderby.com to make your own awards predictions and join the discussion in our forums. Again, thank you so much and all the best of luck with the Oscars and other awards coming up.
Thanks so much, Matt. It was a pleasure talking to you.